Low expectations for African American students, interrupting the cycle. The personal relevance of this issue for me, I've worked in Title I schools my entire career. I was at Jacob Elementary and I'm now at Bick Elementary. And since I've become a teacher, I've noticed that the deficit perspective reigns supreme in our current educational climate. And we have some pretty generalized assumptions about students who come from a background of poverty, like they're low in many academic areas, and they have behavior issues in the classroom. And this perspective is especially hard on African American males. So the students that have a special place in my heart are the students who I feel like are falling through the cracks. Some of these students have low self-esteem and they will exhibit behaviors to mask their insecurity. So some are withdrawn and they've detached from school, but others have more explosive behaviors. And like I said, I feel like these are the kids who are in danger of falling through the cracks because they are hard to interact with in the classroom, but they are the ones who need us the most. So my goals for this project were to investigate and summarize why low expectations are so prevalent for African American male students, explore how low expectations affect development and later success, and find sustainable research-based strategies that would help educators in the classroom. In my volunteering hours this semester, I went to the West End School, which is about a mile from my school. And I was particularly impressed with the expectations that the West End students live up to. Not only are they expected to dedicate themselves to performing proficiently in their academic areas, but they are also expected to develop personally as well. Many of them are learning to play an instrument or how to do karate or learn to speak a foreign language. And just in my short time there, I was able to witness a first grader play Jingle Bells on his violin. I heard 2 students engage in conversational Spanish, and a 4th grader explained his robotics project to me. And so in contrast, while I love our school and I know that we have such hardworking, dedicated teachers, the attitudes of our students, particularly our African American boys, is very different. We have so many students who are so far behind and they're used to being so far behind that their motivation for learning is just zapped. They view school as a mandatory chore. And these experiences side by side this semester, while I'm concerned, I'm also hopeful because the strategies that I found will work in any classroom with a dedicated teacher and they don't depend on budget restrictions or administrative permission. Why are low expectations so prevalent? The 2 main contributing factors are institutional racism and a prevalent deficit perspective. So institutional racism has programmed us as mostly middle-class white teachers to view African American culture as less than. For example, African American male students are way overrepresented in special education programs, particularly in emotional behavioral disorder classrooms. Behaviors that are necessary or normal at home are viewed through an institutionally racist lens. So in a really cool study conducted at ASU, a researcher interviewed 9 African American inmates about their primary schooling experiences, and she found a lot of good stuff. And when talking with one co-investigator, she recalled a time that he was roughhousing with other boys at recess, and he knew that this behavior was perceived in a negative way from the school staff. And he goes on to say that the behavior was comforting to him and normal, but he knew that it was disliked. From Nito and Bode, they state that a deficit perspective is the theory that genetic or cultural inferiority is the cause of academic failure. So children who come from a background of poverty are automatically viewed as harder to teach with less return on instruction, like they have lower test scores. The deficit perspective reigns supreme in all aspects of our educational topography, from how we write educational policy to classroom expectations for individual students. Since the inception of No Child Left Behind, our obsession with high-stakes testing has grown exponentially. Student groups are tracked and summarized by their likelihood of scoring proficiently. So, to come to school as an African American male, you are synonymous with novice scores, and therefore you're of the lowest priority in ability grouping. How do low expectations affect development and success? Essentially, the low expectations that we set for our African American students leads to low self-esteem, negative self-image, and decreases the employment of soft skills. These are the skills that we need to cope in the quote-unquote adult world, such as perseverance, motivation, confidence, self-starting skills, etc. The term school-to-prison pipeline describes the phenomenon of providing such a subpar education born of low expectations that students transfer directly from public education to public reformatory programs. One, in the ASU study that I referenced earlier, one co-investigator put it very succinctly when he said, they would just be like silent, invisible barriers. No matter what you would do, you wouldn't fit in there. So if we assume that this is a common experience for most African American male students, then we can better understand how low expectations contribute to a person's self-worth. How can we interrupt the cycle? So some classroom-based strategies that I found to help were fairly simple, even despite the widespread issue of low expectations and the school-to-prison pipeline. Although these strategies are simple, they do take time to implement. They require a shift in thinking and a dedication to the process. So create a culturally responsive classroom. And this sounds like a lofty undertaking, but it's really not. A culturally responsive classroom, teachers recognize diverse learning styles and they develop instructional approaches to accommodate these styles. A culturally responsive teacher acknowledges the humanity of students, celebrating the differences and responding to them in effective ways. And I've come up with a couple of examples of what a culturally responsive teacher would do in the classroom. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's just some examples. Set high expectations for your students and really believe them. We've all had that moment when we're lesson planning and we've got that irritating doubt that the pesky thoughts creep up on us, like, is this too hard? Can they do this? But our students recognize when we really believe in them and when we expect the best of them. So we need to establish and communicate high expectations. So in order to do this, we need to make progress and not perfection the expectation. This communicates to our students that though proficiency is the ultimate goal, we value the hard work and perseverance that it takes to get there. So some examples of accentuating progress versus perfection might be help students track their reading level progress on a chart every week during their small group lesson, or make a 50 sight word club and inspire students to become a part of that. Praise improvement and the hard work that it took to get there. Implement a learner's circle where students can talk about their academic struggles or accomplishments and what they did to overcome an obstacle. We need to maintain positive communication. This strategy has two meanings. Firstly, ensure that the interactions you have with your students always come from a place of kindness. Our African American boys are used to teachers giving up on them and becoming frustrated with them. Secondly, keep in mind that African American male students often hear deficit terms used to describe them. And in some research from Milner, he says that African American male students understand that they are not supposed to be successful. So to counteract that, within your classroom, give targeted praise about not just performance, but effort as well. Engage students in content with real-world connections. Students from impoverished backgrounds deal with real-life traumas and crises. These students often do not understand the relevance of completing a worksheet or finishing a skill and drill. Content needs to come alive for these students, and though this is best practice for all students, especially these learners. Providing students opportunities to have direct input on their learning, exploring students' individual interests, and considering task design are effective ways to integrate curriculum and actively involve students in all aspects of their learning. Final reflections. Throughout my course and field experience this year, I've grown to understand the expansiveness of this issue. The cycle of deficit orientation and low expectations isn't just a problem at my school, and it's not just a problem at JCPS, but it's the national norm. While the problem is widespread, there are teachers who are currently affecting change. The strategies presented here don't depend on budget limitations or administrative permission. They're strategies that can be implemented by dedicated educators. I plan to do a thorough reflection to find the holes in my teaching interactions with students and bolster my practices with the strategies I found through my research. I also plan to discuss with my principals some school-wide changes that we can make that will ensure that our school is both culturally responsive as well as holding students to high expectations. My final and probably most important conclusion is that students will work towards the expectations that we set for them, and it's our duty to not fail them in this.